The rain hammered against the hospital parking lot's asphalt as Sarah followed Michael outside. Water soaked through her scrubs, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still reeling from his words. "You're the only one who can save her." "What do you mean, I'm the only one?" Her voice competed with the storm. Michael turned to face her, rain streaming down his face. "Rebecca has a rare blood type, B negative. She's burned through all potential family donors. Her body rejected her sister's kidney last year." He stepped closer, his eyes fever bright. "You're B negative too, Sarah. I checked your medical records." The admission hit her like a physical blow. "You accessed my private medical files." "She has weeks, maybe less. The dialysis isn't working anymore." His voice cracked. "I can't watch her die. Not when there's a chance." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the humid summer night. "My father just had a massive stroke. He needs surgery this week. I can't undergo an organ donation procedure now. He needs me. He has other doctors. He needs his daughter." The words echoed across the empty parking lot. "I won't abandon him. Not now." Michael's face changed then, something hardening behind his eyes. "You won't even get tested? Just to check if you're a match?" "No." Sarah turned to go back inside, but Michael caught her arm. "What if you didn't have to choose?" His grip tightened. "What if your father's condition wasn't quite as urgent as it seems?" Sarah stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. "What are you saying?" "I'm hospital administrator, Sarah. Your father's surgery requires multiple approvals, specialized equipment, specific personnel." He released her arm, his voice turning clinical. "Things get delayed all the time. Equipment malfunctions. Paperwork gets misplaced. You wouldn't dare test yourself for compatibility with Rebecca." "That's all I'm asking. If you're not a match, nothing changes. If you are," he shrugged, rain dripping from his shoulders. "Well, then we discuss options." Sarah felt the world spin. This wasn't her Michael, the man who brought her coffee during late-night shifts, who memorized her father's dim sum order, who cried at their wedding. This was a stranger wearing her husband's face. "You're threatening my father's life to save your ex-fiancé?" "I'm trying to save everyone." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Your father's condition is stable for now. Rebecca's isn't. Please, Sarah, just get tested." The next morning, her father's surgery was mysteriously postponed. The specialized equipment needed unexpected maintenance. The leading surgeon had a family emergency. As Sarah stood in her father's room, watching his vital signs, her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "The transplant testing center is open until 6 p.m. Your choice." The hospital boardroom felt like a court chamber, its mahogany table stretching like a judge's bench before Sarah. She stood at one end, her evidence spread out in meticulous order: lost files, altered records, witness statements. Maya sat beside her, a butterfly bandage across her forehead, her spine straight with determination. "As you can see," Sarah's voice carried through the stunned silence, "the pattern of manipulation extends beyond my father's case. Dr. Patterson, would you like to share what happened when you questioned the equipment failures?" The older surgeon stood, his hands trembling slightly. "My wife's entire department faced sudden budget cuts. The threat was clear. One by one, they stood. Nurses, technicians, doctors. Each had a story, a piece of the puzzle that revealed the full picture of Michael's corruption." Dr. Wong sat quietly in the corner, his presence a steady anchor as the truth unfurled. Michael sat at the opposite end of the table, his hospital administrator badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. His face had grown paler with each testimony, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. "Mr. Chen," the board chairman's voice was heavy, "these allegations are extremely serious. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Michael opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by a commotion at the door. Rebecca was wheeled in by a nurse, her face ashen but determined. "I need to speak," she said, her voice weak but clear. "You all need to know." She never finished the sentence. Her eyes rolled back, monitors beeping frantically as her body began to seize. "Her potassium levels are crashing," the nurse called out. "We need to get her back to ICU." In the chaos that followed, Sarah found herself working alongside Dr. Wang to stabilize Rebecca. Through the corner of her eye, she saw security personnel stepping toward Michael, who hadn't moved from his chair. "Wait." Dr. Wang's voice cut through the commotion. "I need to say something." He turned to Rebecca's attending physician. "Run my blood type against hers. I want to be tested as a donor." The room fell silent. "James," Sarah whispered, using her mentor's first name for the first time in 15 years. "You don't have to." "I've been on the transplant list myself," he replied quietly. "Until my kidney disease went into unexpected remission last year. I know what it's like to wait for a miracle, to watch someone destroy themselves trying to save you." He looked pointedly at Michael. "And I know that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places." The test results came back an hour later. Dr. Wang was a perfect match. As security finally led Michael away, his hospital badge removed, he paused beside Sarah. "I only wanted to save someone," he whispered. "Just once in my life, I wanted to be the hero." Sarah watched her husband disappear through the boardroom doors, understanding finally that sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't failing to save someone, it's destroying yourself in the attempt. The code alarm blared through the hospital corridor like a banshee's wail. Sarah's coffee cup shattered on the floor as she ran toward her father's room, her world narrowing to a tunnel of desperation. The monitors screamed their warning. No pulse, no breathing, no time. Beginning chest compressions. Dr. Wilson's voice cut through the chaos as Sarah burst into the room. Her father's skin had taken on a grayish tint, his body jerking with each compression. "Push one of epinephrine," Sarah ordered, taking control despite hospital protocols about treating family. Nobody dared stop her. "Continue compressions. Where's the crash cart?" Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Michael watching, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Their eyes met for a brief moment before he turned away, disappearing down the hallway like a ghost. 2 minutes. 3. 4. The monitor continued its monotone death song. "Come on, Baba," Sarah whispered, using the childhood name she hadn't spoken in years. "Please." Finally, after what felt like eternity compressed into 5 minutes, a heartbeat. Weak, thready, but there. The room collectively exhaled. Hours later, Sarah sat by her father's bed, watching each precious breath. The second stroke had caused significant damage. The latest scans showed dark patches in his brain that hadn't been there before, death blooming like ink stains on paper. "Dr. Chen." Sarah turned to find a woman standing in the doorway, even pale and gaunt. Rebecca Martinez carried herself with a quiet dignity that made Sarah's heart ache. This was the woman her husband had never stopped loving. "I suppose we're overdue for a conversation," Rebecca said softly, stepping into the room. "I'm not leaving my father." "I know. That's why I came to you." Rebecca moved closer, her hospital gown rustling. "I need you to know, I never asked Michael for any of this. I came back to make peace, to apologize for leaving. That's all." Sarah studied the woman who had haunted her marriage like a beautiful ghost. "Why did you really leave?" "Because love shouldn't be a prison." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I was diagnosed with kidney disease. The doctors said I'd need constant care, eventual transplants. I saw our future dissolving into hospital visits and medical bills. I couldn't bear to watch Michael sacrifice his dreams to become my caretaker." "So you left to set him free?" "Yes." Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "And now he's imprisoned himself in guilt and obsession. When I heard what he's been doing," she shook her head. "This isn't love, Sarah. This is madness." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring again, but this time they came from Rebecca's direction. She swayed, blood blooming beneath her hospital gown, where her dialysis port had torn loose. As Rebecca collapsed into Sarah's arms, their shared tragedy painting the floor red, Sarah realized that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones that bleed. 3 days after her father's transfer to City General, Sarah found herself haunting the hospital corridors well past midnight. Sleep had become a distant memory, snatched in 15-minute increments between patient rounds and monitoring her father's condition. The stroke had affected his left side, but the initial treatments were showing promise. If only the whispers would stop. They came in fragments, carried on the air conditioning's breath. Private wing, special case, Dr. Chen's husband. At first, Sarah dismissed them as hospital gossip, too focused on stabilizing her father's condition to care about anything else. But then came the flowers. Elaborate arrangements appeared daily at the nurse's station in the private wing. Roses so dark red they looked black, orchids in impossible shades of blue. The cards were always signed with a simple N. Sarah might have ignored these two, if not for Angela, the night shift nurse who'd worked with her for 15 years. Dr. Chen? Angela caught her elbow one night as Sarah was reviewing her father's latest scans. There's something you should know about Mr. Chen. A code blue alarm cut through the conversation, sending them both running toward the source. As they rounded the corner to the private wing, Sarah caught a glimpse through the closing doors. Michael, his white coat rumpled, clutching the hand of a woman in a private room. The woman's face, though gaunt, held a haunting beauty that made Sarah stop dead in her tracks. "That's her," Angela whispered, pulling Sarah into the medicine storage room. "Rebecca Martinez. She was admitted last week for kidney failure." Angela's eyes darted to the door. "Some of us remember her from before. She was engaged to your husband 10 years ago before he met you. They were the hospital's golden couple, the brilliant young administrator and the beautiful art curator. Then she disappeared without a word." Sarah's world tilted for the second time that week. Disappeared. Nobody knew why. Mr. Chen was devastated, threw himself into his work, built his career. Then you came along 2 years later. Angela squeezed Sarah's arm. "But the way he looks at her now, it's like time never passed." Before Sarah could process this, her father's monitor began chiming urgently. She ran to his room, her heart thundering. As she stabilized his blood pressure, she caught Michael's reflection in the window, standing in the doorway watching. His eyes held something she'd never seen before: desperation. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "we need to talk." "My father needs me," she replied, adjusting the IV drip. "It's about Rebecca." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "She's dying, and you're the only one who can save her." The blood pressure monitor's steady beeping filled the silence between them. Through the window, Sarah could see the first light of dawn, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Such a beautiful morning for her world to fall apart. Sarah Chen's hands trembled ever so slightly as her patient's brain pulsed beneath the microscope. 6 hours into a delicate arteriovenous malformation surgery, her phone vibrated against her hip for the 6th time. The rhythm of the operating room, the steady beep of monitors, the soft whir of equipment, the measured breathing of her team, had become a symphony she conducted with practiced precision, until now. "Dr. Chen," her assistant's voice carried a note of concern. "Your phone." "Almost there," Sarah murmured, her focus unwavering as she navigated the microscopic landscape of vessels and tissue. This surgery could prevent a catastrophic brain bleed. One wrong move, and her 28-year-old patient might never see her children again. The phone could wait. But it didn't. The 7th vibration came just as she finished the final suture, this time accompanied by the urgent overhead page. "Dr. Sarah Chen, emergency call on line 1. Dr. Sarah Chen, emergency call on line 1. She stripped off her surgical gloves, her heart pounding against her ribs as she reached for the phone. The all clock read 9:47 p.m. Nearly 3 hours after she was supposed to be at Lorenzo's, her father's favorite Italian restaurant, celebrating her 5th wedding anniversary. "Sarah?" Her husband, Michael's voice cracked. "Where are you?" "Michael, I'm sorry." The AVM was more complex than, "It's your father." The words sliced through her explanation. He collapsed at dinner. "We're in the ER at Metropolitan." The world tilted sideways. Metropolitan was their competitor hospital, a 20-minute drive across the city. "What happened?" "The doctors think it's a stroke. A bad one. He was asking for you, saying something wasn't right, and then he just, Sarah, you need to come now." Sarah's knees buckled. She gripped the wall, her surgical mask still dangling around her neck. "I'm coming. Don't let them start any treatment. I'm transferring him here." She was already moving, her mind racing through protocols and procedures. As head of neurology at City General, she could fast-track the transfer. Her father would get the best care, under her direct supervision. She had to fix this, had to make up for not being there. The drive to Metropolitan became a blur of red lights and rain-slicked streets. Sarah's mind tortured her with images. Her father sitting alone at the anniversary dinner she'd insisted on having at his favorite restaurant, waiting for his only daughter who chose a surgery over family. Did he show signs earlier? Had she missed something during their Sunday dim sum just 2 days ago? When she burst through Metropolitan's ER doors, Michael was waiting, his hospital administrator badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. His face bore an odd expression, concern mixed with something else she couldn't quite read. Guilt? Fear? He's through here, Michael said, leading her toward the trauma bay. But Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. She brushed past him, her focus singular. Later, she would remember this moment. The hesitation in his voice, the way his hand had reached for her but fallen short. Later, she would recognize it as the instant her perfectly constructed life began to unravel. But for now, there was only her father, lying small and gray against white hospital sheets, and the desperate need to save him. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, accessing her father's digital medical records for the 100th time. Something wasn't right. The timestamps didn't match her notes, and crucial test results from Metropolitan Hospital were missing. She pulled up the transfer documents, squinting at the screen through eyes raw from lack of sleep. Looking for these, she whirled around. Michael stood in her office doorway, holding a thick manila folder, her father's original papers. You altered his records. The accusation hung in the air between them. You're making his condition appear more stable than it is to justify the delays. I'm making sure all options stay open. He placed the folder on her desk, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. Have you scheduled your compatibility test yet? Sarah stood, her chair scraping against the floor. I talked to Rebecca's doctor. She never authorized you to seek donors. She doesn't even know what you're doing. Something flickered across Michael's face. Pain, perhaps, or guilt. She doesn't understand. She's given up. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Do you know why she left 10 years ago? She'd just been diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease. She thought she was protecting me from a lifetime of being her caretaker. So you're forcing her to accept your help now. Sarah's voice cracked. By threatening my father's life? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm trying to save everyone. He stepped closer, his eyes fever bright. Don't you see? This is my second chance. I failed her once. I won't fail her again. At what cost? My father's health? Our marriage? Sarah's hand brushed against her father's folder. The Michael I married would never do this. The Michael you married has always been this person. Someone who would do anything to protect the people he loves. A knock interrupted them. Dr. Wilson, her father's assigned surgeon, stood awkwardly in the doorway. Dr. Chen? About tomorrow's procedure. There's been another complication. Sarah's heart sank. What now? The anesthesiologist is suddenly unavailable. Food poisoning, apparently. Dr. Wilson wouldn't meet her eyes. We'll have to reschedule. Again. After he left, Sarah turned to Michael. Food poisoning? Really? Time's running out for everyone, Sarah. He moved toward the door. Rebecca's latest blood work shows accelerated deterioration. Your father's condition, while stable, his fingers sketched air quotes, could change any moment. The power to save them both is in your hands. As he disappeared down the hallway, Sarah sank into her chair, her father's manipulated medical records scattered across her desk. Through her office window, she could see into his room. He was awake, attempting to feed himself with his unaffected right hand. Each shaky movement felt like an accusation. Her phone buzzed, a text from the transplant center. Your test lot has been reserved for 3 p.m. today. The supply closet on the 3rd floor was hardly ever used, perfect for secrets. Maya, a newly graduated nurse with fierce eyes and a determined set to her jaw, pressed a burner phone into Sarah's trembling hands. We're not supposed to talk about this, Maya whispered, glancing at the door. But there are others. People who've seen what Mr. Chen is doing. Dr. Patterson was about to report the irregularities in your father's case, but suddenly his wife's position in pediatrics was threatened with budget cuts. Sarah stared at the basic flip phone. How many? Enough. We've been documenting everything. Maya pulled out a small notebook. Mysterious equipment failures, conveniently timed staff illnesses, missing paperwork, always happening to people who question the delays in your father's treatment. A sound in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps passed by, then faded. Dr. James Wong wants to meet you, Maya continued. Tonight, at the 24-hour diner across the street. He's been gathering evidence, but he needed to be sure you weren't involved. Sarah's throat tightened. Dr. Wong had been her mentor during residency. He thinks I might be part of this? He needed to be certain. Your husband is very powerful in this hospital. Maya checked her watch. I have to go. Use the phone only for secure messages. We've all seen how Mr. Chen monitors the hospital communications. That night, over coffee that tasted like burned memories, Dr. Wong spread out a pattern of corruption that made Sarah's head spin. Staff schedules mysteriously altered, critical equipment repeatedly failing certification, just before her father's scheduled procedures, specialists suddenly unavailable. We're building a case, Dr. Wong said, his aged hands trembling slightly as he showed her the documentation. But we have to be careful. Mr. Chen has the board wrapped around his finger. One wrong move, and we'll all lose our jobs. How long? Sarah asked. How long will it take to prove everything? A few more days. We just need to. Sarah's burner phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Emergency. Supply closet. Now. The drive back to the hospital took forever. Sarah's heart pounded as she ran up the stairs, not trusting the elevators. The third-floor hallway was deserted, dimly lit for the night shift. She found Maya crumpled on the supply closet floor, a gash on her forehead, the burner phone shattered beside her. As Sarah checked her vital signs, her own phone chimed. A message from Michael. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your little resistance? Maya's lucky. Next time, someone might get more than just a warning. The transplant center is still accepting appointments. Clock's ticking, Sarah. For everyone. Sarah cradled Maya's head in her lap, tears mixing with the young nurse's blood. The evidence they gathered lay scattered around them. Pages of hope turned to confetti on the cold hospital floor. 3 months after the board meeting, Sarah sat between 2 hospital beds in the rehabilitation wing, the afternoon sun painting shadows across her divorce papers. Her father, though partially paralyzed on his left side, squeezed her right hand with surprising strength as she signed the final page. You're sure about this? He asked in Mandarin, his speech slightly slurred, but improving with therapy. Sarah glanced at the bed's other occupant. Rebecca was doing her daily exercises, Dr. Wong hovering nearby with the attentiveness of someone who had given more than just a kidney. The transplant had been successful, and something unexpected had bloomed in its wake. A connection between donor and recipient that went beyond mere organs. I'm sure, Baba, Sarah replied, watching Dr. Wong adjust Rebecca's pillows with gentle hands. Some things break too completely to fix. Michael had checked himself into a psychiatric facility after his suspension from the hospital. His therapist had diagnosed him with a severe savior complex, rooted in childhood trauma Sarah had never known about. A sister he couldn't save from leukemia when he was 12. The knowledge helped her understand, but it couldn't heal the breach of trust. Dr. Chen. Maya appeared in the doorway, her scar now just a faint line above her eyebrow. Your 3 o'clock consult is here. Sarah nodded, gathering her papers. She'd been appointed interim hospital administrator after Michael's departure, her first act being to establish a comprehensive ethics oversight committee. Maya, despite her youth, had become its key coordinator. You know, Rebecca called out as Sarah turned to leave, he really did love you. Sarah paused. I know, just not enough to trust me with the truth. Not enough to let me make my own choices. She managed a small smile. Sometimes love isn't the question. It's what we do with it that matters. As if to punctuate her words, Dr. Wong chose that moment to help Rebecca stand for her afternoon walk. The tenderness in his movements spoke of a different kind of love. one built on respect, choice, and gentle healing. Later that evening, Sarah found herself in the hospital chapel, sitting in the same pew where she'd prayed during her father's first stroke. A message lit up her phone. Michael, asking to meet once he completed his treatment program. She typed out her response carefully. Not yet. But someday, when we've both healed more, we'll talk. Outside the chapel window, cherry blossoms drifted across the hospital grounds like pink snow. Sarah watched them fall, remembering how her father used to say that spring was nature's way of showing that beautiful things can grow from broken places. She touched the window glass, cool against her fingers. Sometimes the deepest scars left the strongest foundations for rebuilding. Sometimes the most painful endings open doors to unexpected beginnings. And sometimes, in the space between heartbeats and healing, you found the strength to write your own story anew.